Just to preface it, I would say that the main theme of this video is going to be centered around boundaries and a obvious necessity to have boundaries, right? So this video is all about the exploration of becoming overwhelmed in life when you take on too much, right? I know that I've joked about having like multiple PhDs in different things like codependency and, lack of healthy boundaries and everything. Um, when I say this, I mean this. I've had a lot of experience with feeling overwhelmed in life as a result of just taking on way too much, right? And that's also a result of having a lack of healthy boundaries, having permeable boundaries, right? Which I am now learning the opposite, and it's kind of challenging. Um, so, what does it mean to take on too much, right? I kind of picture Jim Carrey in Yes Man, right? When he's just like, yeah, 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 just like back and forth to everyone, right? Um, he just says yes to everyone, right? Um, Codependency fucking sucks. The more I heal, the more I realize how much of an unattractive dynamic in an individual it is. It's not good or bad or right or wrong, but it's unhealthy because essentially you don't really see your value, you don't really see your worth, and you externalize that and you do a bunch of things that you don't want to, right? And so somebody like that would end up taking on way too much because they want the validation, they want the external validation. They say yes to everyone, right? Um, and as a result of doing so, they spread themselves way too thin. They end up doing things that they don't actually want to do. They just want the validation and approval, and that's really it. It's that simple. And so they do all these things for everyone else, ultimately taking on way too much and overwhelming themselves, not giving themselves any time to themselves at all. Um, Taking on too much can look like many different things, but um, I would say foundationally, it's a matter of saying yes too much, saying yes to too many things, to too many people. Um, it's fascinating because I'm actually at a point in my life now where I'm really just kind of like both evaluating and reevaluating my relationships, and I'm realizing that previously I held relationships from a place of lack, from a place of an inability to see my own sense of self-worth and everything. um, and I used to think that the more relationships that I had, the better it was for me. But I'm going to utilize this as an example for this video because I think it's beneficial. um, when it comes to relationships, it's much less about quantity and much more about quality, right? um, the people that you're in a relationship with, whether platonic or romantic, um, do you feel safe with them? Do you trust them? Can you be vulnerable with them? Um, can you open up to them and they'll still be there, right? Um, I think that it's an example of taking on too much to try to have too many relationships. And all the while, the relationships are really just not high quality at all, right? Like when you measure a relationship, is there trust there? Is there safety? Is there intimacy? Is there vulnerability? Is there love? Regardless of, love, regardless of whether there's, whether it's platonic or romantic, it really doesn't matter. What is there, right? Again, quality over quantity, right? I realized that I didn't need a lot of relationships. What I need is quality within the relationships, right? Do I feel safe with the person? I've held relationships with people throughout my entire life where I thought it was normal, but I've felt disgustingly and exceedingly unsafe with people, right? Um, no names, of course. I'm just making that very clear, and I just think it's fascinating how much things have changed for me because of what I've learned and everything. Um, and it's really fascinating because, like, if you're in the space of codependency and you think that your relationships revolve around what it is that you can do for other people, and you don't feel like you can receive things from them, your relationships are going to be a one-way street, and you're going to overwhelm yourself, even though that's probably a very familiar dynamic, right? And that's just the way that it is. But overall, you know, like, boundaries are the foundational element to this, right? Because, and I'll give this a very important example that I think will be very helpful. Something that I've really been trying to do the best that I can to kind of like heal from and move on from in more recent years of my life. Which now I realize it also hasn't been that way. Healing is challenging, it really is. But, you know, I think a prime example of taking on way too much is accepting responsibility for another adult, like consistently, constantly, whether it's emotionally, whether it's financially. That can be very stressful. It really can. And in some dynamics where maybe it works, okay, you know, but, you know, what psychology teaches us is that early on in life, like, you know, in very early childhood, you know, like when you're going from like toddlerhood to like becoming, you know, a kid and everything, these two elements, individuation and differentiation, are crucial, and they're healthy, and they lead a person to become independent in their own life, right? And when they don't happen, dependency issues happen. And that's part of the issue, right? So pairing yourself with somebody like that, where the dynamic is that you are required to take on a fuck ton of responsibility, that's not yours to take on, right? You're responsible for yourself, and that's it. That can really lead a person to feel overwhelmed. But why does it happen? I mean, I'm not going to generalize this and make it very simple, because I don't think that it is simple. I think it's actually very complex. But I would say foundationally it has a lot to do with boundaries, but in this case, a lack thereof, right? When you don't have healthy boundaries in place, right? Think about it this way, right? Imagine that you're standing in front of somebody, right? But imagine that between you there is a physical line in the ground, right? That is the boundary between you and between that other person, right? If you were to start taking on responsibility for that other person, you would start stepping, like you would start physically, literally stepping over that boundary, right? How much a person chooses to take on of responsibility for another person is what leads to potential overwhelm, and therefore taking on too much. Taking on too much is about that. It's about saying yes to a bunch of people because you want to be validated, you want to be liked. But the fact that, I mean, I'm just going to say it from personal experience, it is fucking overwhelming to take on so much. It really is. And now that I'm learning that I never needed to and that I don't have to moving forward, it's kind of scary because I've been so used to it that it's like, to an extent, it's like, well, then what the fuck do I do? You know? And I mean, I'm learning. I'm learning to really take myself back and to really, you know, put myself first and do for myself and everything. It is challenging. It's a totally different space of awareness to be in. Sometimes it kind of sucks. Sometimes it's like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing and I'm not comfortable with this. I'm just gonna cry my eyes out, you know. Like it's challenging. It's an element of healing, but yeah, when you feel overwhelmed from taking on too much in life, it probably has to do with a lack of healthy boundaries. Like, that's a real thing, you know. Boundaries, you know, individuation, differentiation. Look at differentiation. The difference between self and other. Where does Chris begin and where does Chris end? Where does the next person begin and where do they end? What is it that I'm responsible for in terms of that person in their life, right? Treating them with kindness. How I treat them is important, obviously. What else? Well, I mean, boundaries actually kind of, it's not that they stop me, but they more so show me what it is that I guess I can do. Not that I have to do, but I can do. And what it is that's not my responsibility to do, right? And so, you know, if you're somebody that finds yourself very overwhelmed by taking on too much, one, you probably are taking on too much. You probably didn't really learn healthy boundaries and therefore have been taking on way too much, right? And you feel overwhelmed as a result of it. Do you have to continue living that way? I'm gonna come at this from a, I guess, an existentialist standpoint. I tend to breathe on the side of existentialism. You can do whatever the fuck you want. You can spend the rest of your life taking on way too much responsibility and feeling overwhelmed, or you can exercise healthy boundaries and piss a bunch of people off. Either way, and if they didn't tell you this one yet, either way, you're gonna piss people off. Your very existence is going to piss people off. The very air that you breathe and the breaths that you take are going to piss people off, in case anyone didn't warn you yet. Yeah.